Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon or teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they're pretty good preachers. All right, let's get started. Peter, where are we in the church year?
Well, we're talking about All Saints Sunday, a time when the church remembers those who have died with faith in Jesus, who belong to the church triumphant. But it's also the 21st Sunday after Pentecost. So we've got a variety of texts to choose from, and whether or not you're celebrating All Saints Sunday, you have to make that call.
And David, what are those texts that we have to choose from?
Well, for All Saints Day, you would have Revelation 7, 1 John 3, Matthew 5, and Psalm 149. And then for the 21st Sunday after Pentecost, you would have Isaiah 1, 2 Thessalonians 1, Luke 19, and Psalm 130.
All right, with all of those options, I don't want to hear either of you say what a hard text this is to preach about, which is usually how you start most shows. You've got 6 to pick from, so no whining this time, guys.
Okay, we're going to make you sit and listen to all of them.
As always, I ask each of you to tell me which text you would choose to preach about. To determine who goes first, in the gospel reading, Jesus talks about the Beatitudes. And one of them is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. What's the one food that when you want it, you've got to have it? You just hunger for it and you've got to go find it?
Oh, anything with salt and grease. Doritos, potato chips, sausage, bratwurst. Yeah. I actually want the sausage you mentioned before. It was like sausage with bacon and cheese or something.
Yeah. See, now that's...
What was that?
There's a butcher up in Minnesota who sells all sorts of kinds of brats, including gummy bear brats. That's the big one.
Right? That was the nasty one you talked about. But the best one... those are good, the salt and sweet. But the best ones are the bacon beer cheese curd brat.
Man.
Now those, just mentioning that's going to be I'm stealing your thing.
I love corn chips. If they're in the cabinet and I want a snack, I will graze on them.
They're not a snack. They're a dinner.
They're delicious.
Yeah.
And they're not potato chips, which are bad for you. They're made of corn. Well, let's see. You mentioned chips in your list. I'll give it to you, David, especially because all those brat flavors sound disgusting. Go ahead, David.
Okay. So I would go with All Saints Day. And normally I do say, you have the same text every year and it's so hard, but All Saints Day, for some reason, I just love that Sunday.
Hooray.
I love the Sunday, particularly if you have a moment when you remember the people who have died that year. Mm-hmm. For me, after losing my dad, it was just really helpful. I mean, it's just it's a beautiful service celebrating the church triumphant, and it has some gorgeous hymns, for all the saints. I don't know. So I'm going to go with All Saints Day. And the text I would use would be the Matthew text, Matthew 5, the Beatitudes. So, Jessica, if you could read verses 2 through 3.
And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, so this year, when I preach on Matthew 5, because you do it every year, this year, I'm going to really focus on he opened his mouth saying, blessed, that the first word of this Sermon on the Mount is the word blessed. And the reason that struck me is I have a friend, they've had a baby Justin, and they're both in competition to see if the baby's going to say mama or papa as the first word, right? Because they're just a friendly competition, but the baby's like gurgling on some soft food, and they're like, I think that sounds like Papa. And I'm like, no. So there's this thing about first words, right? The first word of a baby. I'm thinking, I was talking with a woman who was at a grief group, and she told me, she said, I just hated it. She said, because we all had to share our story. And she said, and I just watched as it kind of went around the group, and it kept coming closer and closer to me. And she's like, I just don't know I don't like talking in a group, and it's going to be my first words, and they're going to hear me. And so there's this issue with first words. They're kind of important words. My dad would always say, you only make a first impression once. And obviously, this is not the first time Jesus has spoken in the Gospel of Matthew, but it is a first in the sense that we have this extended teaching of Jesus. He's gathered all these disciples on the hill. He's sitting down and he's going to speak. And what the first thing he says is he says, blessed. And I think the first words of Jesus reveal to us that that is his mission. He has come to bring the blessing of God upon us. And then he just names all these life situations, and some of them which are not that favorable, right? Being persecuted, mourning, being hungering and thirsting after righteousness. He names all of these situations, some of them which are not perfect, and yet he claims that they are blessed, that the people who live within those situations are blessed. And so for me, the comfort of this is that I have a God who has come to gather me into his kingdom, has come to speak to me, and the very first words he says to me are blessed. Blessed are you. And then whatever life situation I'm in, I know that this God is desiring to bring his blessing into that life situation. And so for me, I would kind of, I don't know, I might imagine just taking different names from Scripture and remembering some part of their story and saying, blessed are you, Adam and Eve, for you will, and blessed are you, Abraham, and blessed are you, Moses, and blessed are you, Deborah, and just kind of walk throughout Scripture and reveal how God has been calling and blessing people throughout history, and then brings that blessing upon us in Jesus Christ. That's kind of how I would
So you're imagining kind of the whole sermon being a walk through Scripture and talking about people who are blessed and what that looks like?
And naming different life situations, right? And then kind of closing the sermon by naming, depending on how many are in my congregation, but if I've had, 5 deaths that year, naming those people. And that they are blessed, because that's what we're celebrating, this work of God and blessing people.
I really like that idea, and I like it because it's a way. It's a unique Sunday, right? If you celebrate All Saints Sunday, you do things that you don't ever do during the church year, and to have this be an occasion for kind of a creative reflection on God's dealing with his people throughout the whole biblical story.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting idea, and then it would, like you said, it would kind of pave the way then to tell the stories of people in your congregation that maybe people don't know very well.
Right, and I might even at some point, people start their sermons in different ways. Jessica, have you ever, if I was going to say...
Grace and peace to you.
Yes, there you go. Right,
that's
the apostolic greeting, grace and peace to you. And I might, just at some point talk about how, when a pastor stands up to preach, there's a lot of things he's going to say. And there are things about your life he's going to bring up that you might not appreciate. But you have to remember, he begins with an apostolic greeting, because what he's saying is, you are blessed. He has come to proclaim the promises of God that you are blessed in Christ. And so, just kind of laying out different ways in which God is blessing us and having us think of the sermon as that very connected communal word where God is blessing.
Well, that's the other piece of that, the communal piece, to help people see their part in this big community that's in space and time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I remember there was a church I visited once, and they had, I think for All Saints Day, that they had taken grapevines and placed these grapevines kind of at the altar and then going around the church toward the back. And then they had people's names on little leaves on the grapevines that they had tied on, not real leaves, but paper, colored construction paper leaves. And they had their names on that. And it was kind of it was the I am the vine, you are the branches. And it was really kind of a memorable occasion, because it surrounds you with a group of people. and it prevents you from just thinking about me, right? You're kind of seeing this whole group that's there.
That's one of the reasons I've always kind of liked it on All Saints Sunday when names are read of people you don't know.
Right.
When I was younger, I used to, kind of wonder why I don't know who these people are. But to name people's names and to help people see there's so many more around you than you realize that you are. I mean, in the end, our orbits are all pretty small usually.
Right.
But this really expands
Well,
that.
like in our chapel, we have this one chapel window. The church throughout the world blesses you, right? And that's and in the window, they have all these people gathered around the Lord's Supper, but some of the faces are not yet in flesh. They're the people who are yet to come, right? The people that we don't even know yet, who aren't here yet, that are also going to be part of this feast for all nations. I think I like that
cool
window.
to think about.
Yeah, it is.
That's really mind-bending.
It's not just in the past or the present. It's those who will. And so that's a more kind of positive, maybe optimistic look toward the future at a time when oftentimes our glimpses toward the future are kind of negative.
And pessimistic, right. Yeah. That we have a Lord who has ascended into heaven and rules over all and is still saying those first words of blessing.
Yeah.
And now it's time for the Ask Jessica jar, the part of the show where we pick a question from the jar and I answer it from the perspective of a person in the pew. All right, David, pick a question.
Okay. What would be a children's message idea for this sermon?
My husband gave this children's message. It was on All Saints Day. And he said, have you heard of Saint Mary? What about Saint Josiah? What about Saint Sophia? And he named the kids that were sitting up there for the children's message.
Oh, that's good.
And he said,
that's good.
We think of saints sometimes as famous people who have churches, but they are people that Jesus died for, just like you. So you're a saint.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Saint Jessica. Thanks, David. What about you, Peter?
What about you, St. Peter?
All right, so I, like David, I really like All Saints Sunday, and I think it's in part because of the communal piece, from beginning to end, people we've lost, people we love, people we don't know. So when I was reading through the texts, I was not limiting myself to the All Saints Sunday text, even though I think I'd want to celebrate that still. But the 21st Sunday after Pentecost also had some nice readings. And as I was reading through them, Psalm 130 stood out to me as one that might be appropriate for people who are particularly grieving on All Saints Sunday, who are thinking about people that they miss.
I love this psalm.
What do you love about it?
The first two verses. Out of the depths I cry to you, hear my voice. Sometimes I feel like that. So this has always been a comforting psalm for me.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm thinking about when I think about those who are mourning the loss of loved ones, that they can feel like they're in the depths crying out.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, it is a day when we think about death, and we think about loss, and we think about really anytime you think about death, you're also thinking about what's the purpose of life and what are we doing with the lives. These kind of Sundays raise existential questions, I think, for people. And so I kind of want to lean into that. Now, what I'm going to say now may seem a little bit of a diversion from that. But for some reason, as I was reading through this psalm, and I was noticing some of the language in the psalm, and thinking about kind of what does it mean to exist, kind of what's the meaning of life, this kind of stuff. I was reminded of that book. Did you guys read that book a number of years ago called Eat, Pray, Love?
No, I did not.
No, but those are three things I like. Tell me more.
Well, I didn't read it either, but I remember it being kind of a big deal. And it's the story of a woman who gets divorced and then goes on this quest to discover the meaning of life. And she spends a third of the year in Italy eating, and then a third of the year in India praying, kind of meditating, and then she goes to Bali and finds love. And the book is called Eat, Pray, Love. Touches on a way to make sense of what is the meaning of life, what am I doing here? And that one, probably for good reason, fell kind of flat. but it highlighted
the
quest. Right. Okay, so now why did that come to my mind? When I'm reading through this psalm, I noticed, so eat, pray, love, those three verbs. I noticed three verbs that stood out to me in this psalm. And so what I'm going to suggest is using this psalm. I'm not sure, again, this is first impression stuff, but I'm thinking about, I wonder if there's a way I could draw three verbs out of this psalm to give a Christian approach to questions of existential angst and crisis, wondering about life and death, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So the first.
And so if I was sitting in the pew and I am mourning, these three words will kind of help me get my bearings.
Yes.
In what's going on in my life.
If I'm missing a loved one, if I'm thinking about my own mortality.
Because grief is so confusing.
It is.
It is.
So I want to meet, and I want to help. And I'm the pastor. I want to help the people who are grieving experience this celebration of All Saints Sunday rightly. I want to help the people who aren't be present with and for the people who are. Okay. So I'm going to give three verbs drawn out of this text, and the first one comes from verses 1 and 2. So would you read verse 1 and 2, Jessica?
Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy.
All right, the first verb I would pick out is cry. There are many reasons to cry in life, and especially at church. Sometimes we're maybe tempted to the good news is such good news that we almost might unintentionally make people feel bad for grieving and being sad and crying out to God. And so I'd want to say, some of you here you're feeling the grief of lost loved ones, and you cry out to the Lord. You cry out to the Lord in your grief, in your loneliness. You cry over the sin that leads to death, and there's a very important place for crying, lamenting, calling out to God in the Christian life.
It doesn't show weakness or
right. This is an honesty.
This is an appropriate response.
Right, yeah. An appropriate Christian response.
Right,
is to cry out to God. So I'd reflect on the reality of grief and death and mourning in this first verb. The second verb shows up in verses 5 and 6. Would you read 5 and 6, Jessica?
I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning.
All right, wait. Cry, wait. We cry out to the Lord for all sorts of reasons, and then we wait. We wait. We wait for things to get better. We wait for the grief to subside. We wait for our turn. We wait for our time. We wait for something. We wait for some sort of change. And of course, we end up waiting a lot because sometimes the waiting just goes on and on. I was reminded of a lady in my congregation. Her name was Barb. And there's that kind of that cultural idea that time heals all wounds. If you just wait long enough, everything will get better.
Right.
And I don't think that's actually the case at
Not
all. And
true.
I think it's actually not helpful to say that, because I would every time I would see Barb, her son Tommy was an adult when he died. She was retiree, and it was 3, 4, 5, 6 years after his death. And every time I saw her, she was crying about her Tommy, and the waiting. It's not a waiting for things to get better just because they'll get better.
Right.
It's waiting for the Lord. It's a waiting for Him to act. It's a waiting that trusts in His promises, and that we just have to wait. And that's hard to do. And that's one of the beautiful things, in a way, I think, of All Saints Sunday, is this is a time where we collectively wait for the resurrection of the dead. We're all thinking about it. I want everyone to experience that waiting together. And so to be a Christian, when you're confronted with the existential questions in life, is to cry. It is to wait. And then the third verb shows up in verse 7 and 8. Would you read that, Jessica?
O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities.
Cry, wait, hope. We hope in the Lord. Why? The psalmist answers the question. For with the Lord there is steadfast love. With him there is plentiful redemption. This hope. In the end, that's why we celebrate All Saints Sunday, because we hope for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come, where all of our loved ones who have gone before us in the faith, God has promised to raise them up from the dead and to bring them to himself with us for all eternity. And that restoration of community and relationship and loved ones, we hope in the return of Jesus and the fulfillment of his promises.
So what do you see as the difference between waiting and hoping?
So the waiting I would think of as kind of this the challenge and the burden of patience.
Okay.
And the hoping I would describe as the clinging to the promise, the anticipation, the eagerness for the Lord to return. Of course, they're related.
Yeah.
But I think it would be the existence we have now and the burden of that and the excitement and the joy of what's promised.
I love it. I think that's very helpful, because that's exactly how I feel when things are hard, crying and waiting, but still hoping. No, this is beautiful.
And it's real simple.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that
That's
would be
good.
kind of the idea is,
Yeah.
kind of use this kind of a refrain throughout the sermon,
Right.
perhaps, that would help people experience All Saints Sunday well.
You could use part of that as a children's message. If you had a coloring sheet that just had the word hope, and then they could color it in,
Right.
that might be a good thing to send back from a children's message and talk about our sure hope in the Lord.
Yeah. I didn't draw that out of the Jessica jar, but if you really want to go to that question, I could try to find that one, Jessica.
I put it back in there.
I guess I offered an answer to a question that you didn't ask. You're welcome.
I'm going to dig a different
You're
one out of the
welcome.
Jessica
You
jar.
get two.
What might be a pitfall when delivering this sermon?
I really like that one. Let me think. Maybe drawing the analogy to that weird book that you talked about. Have you read it?
I've not, and so maybe it's the kind of thing that the fact that it came to mind was because it was a 3-word pithy
Right.
statement, and so I'm
Memorable.
not suggesting necessarily that you'd even mention the book. It's just the way that those words captured for a lot of people apparently what the meaning of life is, or what you do with an existential crisis.
That makes sense.
You do kind of
Replace it,
you
yeah.
wonder about this when you're preaching, because you want to help people see what cultural artifacts are significant and why they're significant, and
Because you're tapping into
because
something.
you're tapping into
Right.
something.
Right.
And at the same time, anytime you do that, you run the risk of sending them off in a train of associations with that book or that
Right.
movie.
They've
and
seen
so,
the movie, and
and
yeah.
then especially if you haven't seen it or read it yourself. I had all these same thoughts. Where I haven't read this, I haven't watched it. Should I do this? And then I was about to kind of scrap it and go a different direction. And then I came across how many millions of copies it had sold, and how much money the movie had made. And I thought, nah, even though I haven't, this is something that it's important to our culture apparently.
That's
So-
legitimate. Yeah, if that many people are drawn to those words, totally makes sense. That was a good one. Thank you, Peter. That's all for today. We have free resources to guide your next step in planning at concordiatheology.org. You should check it out. You should also check out the other podcast I host, Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. Twice a month, I host conversations with Concordia Seminary faculty, and we talk about the ways in which their understanding of God and their faith is real in their everyday lives. The show's for anyone who wants to deepen their theology. It's for your congregation. Tell them about it. Tangible, Theology Learned and Lived. You can find more episodes of Lectionary Kickstart and Tangible on any of the major podcast apps. If you'd like to see the show continue, please subscribe for free, share, and leave a review. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordelot. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart, when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday.
All right, well.
Go on.